Hello, I'm Ed Baker, and it's a pleasure being with you again to talk about leadership. And today I'm interviewing Dr. Jeff Koplan, a friend and colleague of many years, who is currently Vice President at Emory University for Global Health and Director of the Global Health Institute there. Dr. Koplan was Director of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and also Director of its Chronic Disease Center years before. We've known each other for many years, and Jeff, it's great to be with you again today.
A basic question about leadership. Some of your role models or mentors, tell us a little bit about people that really influenced you early on and what you really learned from.
In thinking about this over the years, there are lots of people that influence you in one way or another, and it obviously starts from school on. And early on, I had a vision that I might want to go into medicine, and it was crafted by the pediatrician I had. And I don't know whether that was inspired by fear of him or by his role, but this guy was straight out of Norman Rockwell and had the large bag, made house calls, had graduated from Harvard Medical School in, I think, 1912, served in World War I. So this guy was classic, old school stuff, and I didn't even know what he did, and it was just the image of this fellow of coming to help and then causing me pain that I guess was an early start to thinking, well, maybe medicine was a good thing to do. And then we all have, various types of mentors and role models in school, but in medical school I had one professor, Kurt Duschel, who was chief of community medicine, who guided me towards a career in public health. He was a kind, gentle, creative, very thoughtful person who did a wonderful presentation using communities as if they were clinical models. So he did a slideshow where he would show, he previously been at the University of Kentucky, so he did a slideshow where he'd show a picture of a rural holler, and would say, what do you see in this? And most of the students would, there's a tree, there's a dirt road. He'd say, no, medically, health-wise, what do you see in this? And much like looking at a patient where you're not trained, you don't know what you're looking at, he began to take this and what issues do you think are present here? And would get into water and sanitation, other issues, how people live, how many rooms, what types of food might they have, how would that influence their health? What could you guess occupations that would be appropriate to a community like this? And by the end of it, you realize how much information you had just based on that quick community snapshot. So it's that kind of inspiration thing. Over the years, a lot of people at CDC who are mentors. My view is one, you never stop having mentors or role models. As I say, I work every day here now, and in my time with Mike, I learned something from him every day. Mike John's my supervisor here. You also learn from people who are not above you and not your boss. You tend to think of mentors or role models as the people older than you or above you. I think it's really important to learn from everybody else around you. So I've learned as much or more from people that I've supervised, people I've worked with, sideways, people whose training was very different or maybe very little. So there's lots of places to find mentors and role models, and in some ways it's not even live human beings. You read literature, you read history, and you see people or read about people and say, there's something to be learned from that person.
You mentioned Kurt Duschel, he's sort of a legendary figure. Did you find yourself doing things or sort of looking at certain situations and imagining what he might have done in those situations that sort of carried over, influence how you might have handled a particular situation, either from him or someone else? It's sort of it's that transference effect. Did you have that experience?
Well, I think you absorb different, some traits you either have or you don't have. And some things you can observe and absorb or that resonate with you and stick with you. With Kurt, it was that gentleness, kindness, and perseverance in all groups. I think one thing is, here was a fellow who had worked on Indian reservations, had worked in Harlem, had worked with Latino communities, had worked with poor white communities in Appalachia, and in every place he went, he was comfortable in his own boots. He never changed. He was the same person and was patient and listening and trying to make a difference everywhere he was. And that was a good model for global health and a good model for working anywhere. I learned from Bill Roper, who is at UNC now and was director of CDC for a few years, a long friend. One of the things I learned from him in management was, and leadership, was picking a small number of priorities and being a bulldog and sticking to those priorities. And once your priorities, he said if you have got more than 3 priorities, he used the expression, if you've got more than 3 priorities, you've got a list, you don't have priorities. And he would drive those every single day, and that's stuck with me as a way to get things done.
Jeff, what attributes do you feel are important for a leader's effectiveness?
Well, everybody's smart, so being smart is no attribute to me. In fact, sometimes it's refreshing to find somebody who's really dumb. So when someone says, well, so-and-so is smart, as if that's an excuse, in an academic health center or most places we work, that's not worthwhile. Is the person wise? Are they thoughtful? Do they make good judgment? And do they listen a lot before they make a decision? And so I think listening and absorbing what people are saying, thinking, soliciting criticism, soliciting alternative views is an important attribute amongst many.
Jeff, could you say a little bit about how your leadership style is important in terms of organizational change?
One, I consider organizational change a daunting task and one that shouldn't be taken lightly. And it pays to think when you're going to make an organizational change why you're doing it. There's always a temptation to make an organizational change when you really just need to make a personnel change. And that ought to be avoided. It's a workaround of the hard job of removing a leader or what else you might do. But there are times when in an organization the content of the work, the responsibilities of the institution change in a way when a different form of organization can be more responsive. And in the late 70s at CDC and in public health in the U.S., there was still a thrust towards just infectious diseases being what was the bulk of public health. And just infectious diseases drove what CDC did. Yet, if you step back a step and looked at what were the major causes of death and disability in the U.S., it wasn't infectious diseases. They were, are, and will be important, but they aren't the driving feature of what caused people to get admitted to Emory University Hospital or Crawford Law or Grady or anywhere else in the country. It's heart disease, cancer, hypertension, stroke, and the risk factors that lead to these. We're talking about the chronic diseases. And so public health needed to step into those. So then when you say, well, what does public health have to offer these? Well, population-based perspective, either interventions we can do that are on a preventive nature that can make a difference in these diseases. And by the late 70s, we knew enough about heart disease and cancer, and many of them, that we could make a huge difference in these things, but we weren't taking a population-based approach to dealing with them. So in my view, it was a ripe period for change in public health and in CDC in particular, and we started the process of making that change. And it's a government agency. Making changes aren't easy. I was not in charge of the government agency by a long shot. I was senior staff to the then director, but convinced him to make an investment in chronic diseases as a start to pulling all these things together. So he invested $500,000 at the time, and I thought our first item needed to be a real win, and it was a focus on breast and cervical cancer screening. Other countries had robust programs in these. We didn't. If you were poor and didn't have insurance, you weren't covered. The rates of more advanced cancer were immensely higher in poor populations. So we started the program in West Virginia and Kentucky, the same hollows that Kurt Duschel had shown me earlier. And we learned that women, the concept was that women didn't have access to health care, and that's why they weren't getting screened, that's why they weren't, breast cancer, cervical cancer wasn't being found early. When we started to do the initial evidence-based evaluation of what was going on, we found that women who had later been found to have advanced stage breast cancer and never had had a mammography, had seen the doctor an average of 3 to 4 times a year in the subsequent years. They had access to help. They were seeing the doctors. They may be seeing them for the flu or a sprained wrist or headaches, but they were seeing doctors. They just weren't being ordered. And so with that, we kicked off a national program. Today, that's a $300 million program in every state. But with that, we began to move and got CDC to recognize that pulling some pieces together, creating a chronic disease center made sense. In order to make it palatable, we got an outside consultant group in so that they could bless it, so it wasn't just an internal thing. The director at the time, Jim Mason, was courageous, put the thing in place, and the place has flourished ever since. And with it, it's changed American public health, because every state health department now has active programs.
Jeff, could you say what you feel are the key critical success factors, both in terms of working within an organization and outside of an organization as a leader?
I think there are different kinds of activities, but they're closely related, and in my own view, it's very hard to be successful at external unless you've shored up the internal, and hard to do the internal unless you've taken care of the external. And by way of explanation, that may not be true of every organizational unit where you look at leadership, but in a government agency, you've got to do the external because you've got political oversight of what's going on. And unless you're able to deal with Congress, both parties in Congress, leaders in Congress, the White House, other government agencies, other officials around who have views of how your agency should be run and things they should do, your workforce and your ability to meet your own role and responsibilities is going to be compromised, and it has periodically. Similarly, if you don't have a workforce that can deliver on these great demands that are placed on it, you're going to have a hard time outside talking to people. You need to have confidence that the folks inside can do that job. So you've got to play both sides. If you only do one, you may make it go for a while, but when the anthrax hits the fan, you're going to be in deep trouble if you can't turn around and you've got adequate troops to do it. So, plus, when I came back to CDC in '98, I had 22 years in the organization, so I knew a lot of people. And it was a luxury and something I really enjoyed. So, throughout the organization, just walking down the corridors, I knew the security guards, I knew the folks who did dishwashing in the lab areas, and that was really important.
Say a little bit, Jeff, if you would, about what you look for in selecting people that report to you, that are part of your team.
Well, that's real easy. You pick people who are smarter than you and know more than you do, and that's the only way to put together a team. You want people who, when you turn and look at them for the crises that you know are just around the corner, you're going to feel good and say, boy, am I glad this person's there, because they've got more to offer than I do in this scenario. The worst thing to imagine is looking around a group of people and thinking to yourself, well, I know more than this person does. Maybe I should try to do their job. When you got people better than you, you're not tempted to do that. You can delegate and feel the job's going to be better down the road. We had the luxury of that. And I'll say that in the example, in the midst of the anthrax attack, when everybody said, oh, this is terrible, you must be having a terrible time, it was difficult, and it was terrible because people lost their lives. But for an epidemiologist, there's no one listening here, we're not taking this. For an epidemiologist, those are the skill sets you're called upon to deliver. And you feel like you're using everything you've been trained to do in that sense. When I look around the room of the folks we had assembled to work on this, I felt great that you couldn't ask for a better group of people, and you'd say, even if we don't have the answer today, even if we're struggling, even if folks are criticizing us, this is the group of people I want around me to work on it, and you derive strength from the fact that you had such a great team.
It was a great team. It really was. Let's talk about the other side of the coin. That's that awkward time when there's somebody on the team that you just at some point say to yourself, this is not working out for whatever reason. It may be somebody that was there before you came into a position, or there wasn't a good fit You faced that challenge, I faced that challenge. Say a little bit about how you go about dealing with that situation, because that can be challenging.
You know, I think to me, in a managerial or leadership role, to me that's the absolute hardest thing to do. I'd rather have 100 outbreaks than have to get rid of somebody in a setting like that. And usually in the places we work, these are people you know, may have known for years, may be friends with, may genuinely like and respect at a number of different levels, but circumstances have arisen that either changes in what's being called upon, the organization has changed, or the person is just not functioning properly in that role, where you got to make a change. And it's really tough. It's very tough in government, because government doesn't kind of facilitate the removal of people from positions that they're in. And so it's a tough thing to do.
Let me ask about people that you've reported to. You mentioned earlier having a person that you report to here at Emory, or some people have boards that they report to. Or
Everybody reports to somebody.
How do you see your responsibility with respect to the person that you report to? What are some of the issues there?
Well, I've had the good fortune throughout my career, virtually since beginning at CDC and in every other place I've been, to have supervisors or people I reported to who I really respected, really liked, and really learned a lot from. And they were all real different from each other. And I don't think that's me being Pollyanna-ish. I was just fortunate. These are good people. By the same token, knowing myself, I would last about an hour and a half with someone who I didn't respect, didn't like, or didn't respect. Although I'm not giving myself enough credit, because I lasted almost 2 years in the current administration.
Yes, I know what you mean. Shifting focus, not to necessarily get away from what you just said, but you get asked to do a lot of things, and people in leadership positions are asked to do more than is typically humanly possible. How do you decide, I know that's a challenge for emerging leaders or people in leadership positions, to say yes or no to things? You must get asked to do a lot of things now in your current job. Here at Emory, you got asked to do a lot of things in previous situations. How do you decide when to say yes and when to say no?
Well, one, I do it poorly. That all this time of doing it hasn't made it much easier or any better in terms of the judgment. An example is as recent as this morning, when I got an email from an old friend who's a professor at Harvard to participate in a symposium in Japan next fall. And I was reading through it, and it looked okay. So what are the criteria? What is this content? Is it something that's important that I can contribute to? Will it have much of an impact? Where is the place? If something, those things can have lesser value if you just walk across the street to do it than if you're having to travel long distance. When is it? All these issues. And I was all set to say, well, this isn't really the right symposium, and it's not a convenient time to do it, and to be in a big city and is not all that great. But his last line in the invitation was, and these folks that run this symposium provide unsurpassed hospitality. And that stopped me. I thought, wow, unsurpassed hospitality. And I get a bathrobe? Well, what's going on here? So that's, to show what a mature decision maker I was, I had to spend 10 minutes trying to interpret unsurpassed hospitality. And then I wrote back and said, you can do better, and this isn't a good time. So I said no, but then did, in the note back to him, say, tell me more about this unsurpassed hospitality. So, yeah, it's, all of us have too many things to do every single day, and you try to pick the right ones. And, I'd say I'm about 60% right, or maybe 70%. But I'm still regularly doing things where at the end of it, and you can't always tell, at the end of it I say, this just really wasn't worthwhile. This trip, what I thought I was going to get out of it, I didn't, or what I thought I was going to get out of it for Emory didn't work out. And then on other ones, you take a chance and you go do it, and you don't know, and you can have terrific outcomes that were unpredictable. So maybe it's like diagnosing a myocardial infarct. You need to have some false positives, or you're not doing false negatives, false positive, or you're not doing a good job.
That's great. Well, someone once, I was asked him to do something, and this person had decided in the conversation not to do this particular thing. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "I don't think this is the kind of thing I should be doing." And I kind of stopped as if, God had spoken to him. Because it's sort of like finding the right words almost to say no. Some of the times is a little bit challenging, but it sounds like you figured it out as best you can.
You tell the truth. I've got a conflict. I'm overcommitted. I'm not the best person to do it. I guess you really say, I don't really like this. I don't want to do it. But and it's different levels. I try anything at Emory that involves students or training or teaching. I make that a priority as something to do because it doesn't come up all the time, and I feel a responsibility here to do it. So whatever it is, any class, any training program, I'll make that a priority item.
We were talking earlier today about the difference between leading in a government organization versus leading in an academic organization. You've made a transition to academia. Do you see it as being different? The context is different. Do you think it calls for different strategies or skills or approaches in an academic environment in contrast to government?
Yeah, and I'd also add the business community because I was in the private sector for 5 years, and so there's significant differences. To everything from how to run a meeting to the nature of the workforce are all quite different. First of all, most government agencies are relatively hierarchical. There are clear layers of the organization, and as you move up it, your decision-making ability and your authority changes as you move from one to another. That doesn't mean there is an open discussion of what to do about something and a vigorous exchange of ideas, but what happens at a certain point in a government agency is a decision gets made at whatever level it is. That's what the course of action is going to be, and people say, 99% of the people say, that's what we're going to do. There are always aberrations, but largely it works. I came to the university, and I knew there were significant differences. And you can make a decision whatever you want, but everybody's a free agent, and there's a lot, it is not as clean a course of action. And even in meetings, everybody's a professor, and by virtue of that title, you're a free agent on a lot of this stuff. And it's a different, it's fine, it's just different. It's a lot less efficient. In addition, there's a lot of people with expertise, and my definition of expertise is knowing a lot about one thing that permits you to pontificate on everything else. So there's a lot of that goes on as well. But yeah, I've gotten used to it and can deal with it. It manifests itself very much at meetings. And when I first came, Mike asked me to chair a group on something, and we had a meeting, and the meeting was like 11 to 12, and this group was used to having a 2.5-hour meeting that included lunch, and so I had abandoned the lunch, which was a big mistake, and had shortened it to an hour because I couldn't see why the topic merited so much discussion. And we started the meeting, and I, again, was still in my old mode, and I said, okay, we're here for the following purpose. By noon, we've got to come up with a decision on this issue. There's the following range of contributors to this decision, and my goal is that we'll march through this together. Everybody will express their views. 12 o'clock, we'll walk out of here. We'll know what we're going to do. We're going to have it set. The expressions on the faces was not one of unbridled enthusiasm for this. We moved through it. We made some progress. It's 11:45, 15 minutes left. I say, okay, when we've had this good, vigorous discussion, everyone's expressed themselves, let's move towards the decision. Another couple of minutes go by. We're kind of moved towards it. Someone from the other side of the room brings up something that's totally different, not part of the decision, and won't let go of it. And I'm saying, well, can we come back to that later? Couldn't we do that another day? No, I'm going to discuss this right now. We now have 5 minutes left. I say, well, we got 5 minutes, got to make this decision. And we sort of made it. People you could see were physically a little uncomfortable. I said, that's great, it's new, we've got the decision, I can come back to my supervisor with it. No one leaves their seat. One other person got up. The others continue to sit there and argue and they're like, forget it, let's let this guy leave with whatever he thinks the decision is. We're going to continue to discuss this because we haven't made a decision. Yeah, so that was a learning experience of a different way to do business.
It's a different environment.
A different environment.
Say a little bit, Jeff, if you would, about leadership development. We're here today with a Leadership Academy. This is a program designed to develop leaders. You've helped other people develop. You've helped individuals that you may have seen along the way as sort of rising stars or people that you said, that person's really going somewhere. What have you done, or what advice do you have that fits into this notion of a responsibility of leaders is to develop other leaders?
You know, none of us, there may be natural leaders, you know, whether Napoleon or, you know, whoever. The truth is, even natural leaders, there are periods and circumstances by which their leadership can be exercised and appreciated, and other periods where it's useless. And so, you know, the classic example for me is Churchill, who we all look at now as just one of the great leaders and a crucial player in world history. But at various times in his own career, this guy was washed up and a total failure. At the end of World War I, from his role in the Navy and his role in operations in Turkey, he just had completely blundered. But the skill set he had in the right time and right place played out well. So leadership is many times subject to where you are, what you're doing, etc. But a lot of it is learned, and I think one of the, you know, you can learn, if you're open to it, you can learn from a lot of people, but courses like this or programs like this can, in a very distilled way, enable you to think about things, approach issues and problems in a systematic and not to consider that leadership is intuitive. There's a lot of stuff we do that's really counterintuitive. And you got to learn that, and someone's got to teach it to you. So I think that it's a really important element. And no matter what stage you're in, I mean, you can have done a lot of leadership positions, and I suspect folks who are in here who've had a lot of leadership positions before still go through this and say, wow, if I had to revisit that thing I did before, I'd do it differently based on this. So
you always keep learning.
Absolutely. I mean, it's if you don't, you're missing out a lot of the fun, as well as being less competent than you ought to be.
What about renewal balance? That's a real challenge for leaders, particularly when you're in very demanding jobs. You've got a lot of responsibilities. What do you yourself do to try to maintain some balance in life, given the work-life challenges? And also, how do you take time for renewal, just to sort of get away from it all? What works for you?
Well, as a number of folks who know me would suggest, I'm a bit obsessive about exercise. And I find exercise a useful both stress reliever, and I like doing it. And so I also, I don't do it because of long-term health benefits. I do it because I like doing it when I do it. But it's very useful to clear your head, and to, even no matter what else is going on, to carve it out. And as supervisors I've had know, and others, I treat it as a bodily function. You should pardon the expression. I mean, it's no different from eating or other things you would do, where no one would ever consider saying to you, I'm sorry, you can't leave the room now to use the restroom. You'll have to wait till tomorrow. I feel the same way about exercise. It is an important physiologic function, and I'm going to carve out a piece of every day to do it. And if that intrudes on other things, I mean, I'm not crazy. I am crazy about it, but I'm not totally crazy about it. I'll make some modifications. But it's too easy in a busy job, no matter where you are, to find things every day that'll intrude on it. So unless you protect it and keep it to one side, it's going to get eroded. So that's why I get up at 1 in the morning to go exercise. No, I get up early and do it because other things intrude during the course of the day. Yeah.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Thanks for doing this. If you could point to 2 or 3 things that we've talked about today, sort of key messages about leadership, either specific experiences you've had or things that you would want people to sort of take away from all this, what would those be, Jeff? What specific things would you want people to really hold on to?
I think one thing we haven't mentioned that I think is important, at least in the jobs I've had, is frequently the job, the position, conveys the leadership. And one shouldn't confuse oneself with the respect and accolades paid to you because you are in the job. So I think you start to do a less good performance and you run into trouble when you confuse your own self with the glory of whatever position you have. And I think that applies in academia and in business and in government certainly as well. And early on it was clear to me that when I had a great job where people were really respectful and really gave you great honor because of the job, it's the job. It's like it's the job, stupid. That's it. And it was driven home to me years ago in a meeting in the World Bank. There was a period of time when I've done a lot of work with the World Bank, particularly in China. And I was meeting with a senior official of the bank, and we were in a nice meal in the bank private dining room. White linen tablecloths, sherry before the meal. We're having an espresso after it, and I enjoyed it. It was very pleasant. We were having a good discussion, being well treated. And I said to my colleague, this is when just before I was retired first time from Chronic Disease Center at CDC, and I said, a year from now when I'm not at CDC and director of the Chronic Disease Center, will I be able to come back here and we can continue to work on these projects together and we can sit here and have a pleasant meal like this? He said, oh yeah, you can come back and we'll probably be able to find projects to work on together, but look out the window. You see that Wendy's across the street? We'll be sitting over there for our lunch next year. And it wasn't said cruelly, and it wasn't said totally facetiously either. And I got the message, and it was a valuable one. It was true. And so without that, it makes it hard when you move from one thing to another. When you have 8,000 people that are reporting to you one day and a $7 billion budget, and the next day it's one person and a much lower budget, But if you recognize with some appropriate level of modesty coupled with a reasonable amount of self-esteem, you can do all those changes without too much wear and tear on yourself. When you think you're the job, then you're in trouble. And so is everybody else who works for you.
I totally agree. And that's a great note to end on. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Well, I suspect you've got some questions that you all would like to ask. So let's open this up. I see someone in the back of the room that has a question. So,
can you describe when you had a leadership misstep or mishap, perhaps, and what you learned from it, and how you kind of, fix the problem?
Leadership missteps, probably, lots of them. Some are making a wrong choice in selection of someone for an important senior position, and then deciding whether how you're going to live with it, how you're going to make this work. Some being, how did I deal with that? You try to make a go with it for as long as you can, not to justify your mistake, but to make sure it was a mistake, and to make sure there aren't other ways to make it work anyways. In some cases you can make it work, and in some cases you just have to pull a plug and say, this isn't working out, and we're going to have to do something else. Some missteps are ego-related. You're unwilling to compromise in something, or you've said something to someone that was inappropriate, and you've got to work off of that. Some are just performance. You don't spend enough time, or I haven't spent enough time on something to really make sure it happened or did good work on it. So there's, I can find flaws in every single element of my work history somewhere along the line that didn't perform as well as I would have liked to, or others would have liked me to. So,
Jeff, you've had a great career, you still do, but you've had to make some decisions periodically about, for example, to leave the CDC, to go to Prudential, to leave Prudential, go back to the CDC, to come to Emory. Do you have any principles or guidelines that you use or used in making those decisions, and how you came to make those decisions that you could share with the fellows in the Leadership Academy that they might use as they face those moments in their career?
Thanks. You know, the reason I pause is that I really feel so fortunate to have having had good opportunities at different stages. So it's kind of unfair to say, well, I didn't like this, so I left and I went to do something else, because that's great if you have another good opportunity. If you don't, it's a little harder. By the same token, an example would be the first time I retired from CDC, I had been one of the contenders for CDC director in '98, and the internal candidate as opposed to the external candidate. And when not selected for the position, I remember the moment extremely well because I was so disappointed. In fact, I was in what is the new American Cancer Society headquarters in whatever it is, Forum, downtown, because I was working on the Atlanta Olympic Committee. And I got a phone call, and it was from the Assistant Secretary for Health, and I thought, oh, Malik, this is great, this is the call. And I took the call, and they said, you know, you're number 2. And so that was that. So I was very disappointed. And with that said, you know, I've got 22 years here. I'm still relative, by my current standards, I was very young at the time. And thought, this is a good time for a change. I need to do something else. At this stage, I don't want to kind of re-go through the cycle of another director and do things that are necessary to work for another director. I stayed for a few months and left. I subsequently learned that I had a lot of things to learn, that by going in the private sector, I was learning an immense amount that would have made me better for being CDC director. I learned that the choice that they made was the right one and really the best person for CDC at the time, and better than I would have been then. And so it was a learning experience to do that shift. And having been in a place for 22 years, it was a tough thing to leave, and particularly to go work in the private sector, but it was a great thing to do. It was, in every way, it was enjoyable. I guess a problem I have, and it's an internal one, is I have a real tough time applying myself to stuff I'm not interested or don't like. I mean, maybe that's true of others, but others do a better job of either masking it or sucking it up and getting it done. And if I, you know, amongst my liabilities are, if I think something's important and like it, I'll usually do a pretty good job and work hard at it. If I don't, I'm terrible at it. And so I'm good for when it looks like the job's going to be filled with those things that I don't like doing, or 3 days go by when I don't look forward to coming into work, I'm as good as out of there. It just, I can't make a go of it. I'm a real bad performer. When I like coming into work every day. So when I don't, I better find something else to do. And my wife frequently says, as soon as she starts hearing me bad talk a couple of times about something, she says, oh, whatever this is history soon, because she knows it's, I don't have that flexibility, if you will.
What do you do? You kind of mentioned that sometimes everybody reports to somebody, and in your position at the CDC, you eventually reported to the president or the administration, and it sounded like at one point that wasn't acceptable to you. What do you do as a leader when you think your job is really important, but you don't think that the organization is going in the right direction, and you can't seem to make it go the way you think it should go?
That's a crucial question, and there's a number of elements to that. So in a government position, and the one I had as an agency head, the direct report and the structure of this last couple of administrations, it's varied in previous eras. But in the last 2 administrations, when I was hired in the Clinton one and then on to the Bush one, the CDC director reports to the Secretary of HHS. So, okay, so then you say everyone reports to someone. But in the structure of the Bush administration, a whole level of staff people who work for the Secretary felt they were also in charge of the agency directors. So they could call up any time and tell you what to do. and they could call up your staff anytime and tell them what to do. Now, in technical terms, that really pissed me off, which is that when you have people, one, who think they're above you and you don't, who are calling your staff directly to tell them what to do and putting them in a compromised situation, this is not a pleasant work environment. And when your boss gives everybody permission to do that, and the operating style is a hostile, nasty one, where the calls are, you jerk, I want you to do this, and it's not a professional, collegial atmosphere, that makes it even worse. So that's a bit of the scenario we're talking about. How do you decide when to leave? Well, you know, the CDC director, and this may be true of many government agencies, have always viewed themselves as in a crucial intermediary point between whatever administration is, Republican, Democrat, doesn't matter, and the workforce. Because whatever administration is, they're going to be asking you to do things that you don't think are scientifically correct, are not public health-wise appropriate, etc. And you've got to be in a position to push back on them and protect your workforce as much as you can. So you can't expect it to be rosy and just sit there and they tell you, they do whatever you tell them to do and they listen to you and all things. There's always this tense interplay. All the time in the Clinton administration, I would be called up by usually White House people, not people in the department. And this is a different level of direction. You'll get White House calls and you'll get departmental calls. White House calls, they'd start screaming at me, swearing at me about not doing enough for some group, usually around HIV. HIV/AIDS was usually the big political thing. And it was, you're not doing enough, this group's got to get it, why didn't the city get this award? And you explain to them the process, they'd still yell at you and then tell you to get it done. So this would be an ongoing battle. 2 days later, there's a different administration. I'm getting the same phone calls, except, why the hell are you giving money to this group? And so that you knew the world was in a balance at that point, when you could get equally irate phone calls around the same stuff from different sides. I think that, you know, what actually happened was, as I had been thinking of transiting from government to something else, my good friend and colleague from Emory on my advisory board, one Dr. Michael Johns, had said to me, this is a pretty untenable atmosphere you seem to be in. If you feel you've got to leave and you don't have anything, and my own view is to never get another job when I leave when I'm in, not have something lined up, that it demoralizes the folks you're working with. You make a decision to leave not because something's better, you make a decision to leave because the circumstances aren't right, and then you find something better. But Mike said, come over and sit. I'll find a place for you. I'll get you a salary that'll keep your lights on. Just let me know when you want to come over. So I had that in the back of my mind, and we got through anthrax, and I wanted to get through the budget of that year because we had a major building program, and I wanted Congress, the administration wasn't going to fight to it. We had to get Congress to give us some more funding. And two things happened. I finally had delayed a trip to China on some work, and I was over there and was having dinner with the Minister of Health, and we're having meetings every day, and I was thinking, I'm being treated about 100 times better over here than I am at home. I'd rather work for this Minister of Health than the Secretary I'm reporting to every day. These people are immensely more rational and scientifically based than the folks I'm working with at the moment. So that was kind of got me thinking. And then I came back, and a few weeks later, I was on I teach in a leadership course at Yale School of Management, and not dissimilar from the discussion here, although it's in a master's program. And it's set up in panels, and it's actually taught by a former Emory professor, business school professor, Jeff Sonnenfeld. So we're at a panel discussion, and Jeff puts together some unusual panels. So I was on it representing the non-governmental, rather the non-profit sector, governmental sector. And another person on the panel was from a huge energy company like Enron, but not Enron. The guy was worth gazillions. And in his presentation, he said the worst business situation to be in is when you have all the responsibility and the authority's been taken away from you. And, it shouldn't have taken it did not take a rocket scientist to figure this out, but I hadn't really thought of my own scenario in those terms. And when he said that, I thought, that's the situation I'm in. That's why I'm beating my head against the wall. Most important, it wasn't good for the agency. I mean, I could have stuck around and weathered it because there were so many nice things about being CDC director. But once I realized that, I realized I wasn't operating in a way that was good for CDC's interests, and they needed somebody else who could better deal with this group of people.
One thing happened, I'm not sure about the chronology, that I wondered if you'd be willing to talk about. This was after 9/11, when there was an outpouring of support for public health and for funding public health, particularly to make the system better prepared and to strengthen the infrastructure, things that you and I worked on together. And you went to Congress, I think. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure about all the details. And there was an Appropriations Committee hearing, and someone said to you, Dr. Koplan, what's it going to take
Arlen Specter
to solve this problem? And before that meeting, you had been told what the dollar amount was. Mm-hmm. Replay the tape a little bit of what happened, because the program that ensued from this particular event that I'm describing has had profound benefits for public health in the United States. But there was a moment where you were asked a question. And this to me is about leadership on the line. What happened?
The department liked to keep a real, in the current administration, they like to keep a very tight leash on folks like all the agency directors. And most are, I was a political appointee as well, but I never thought of myself as a political appointee, and I guess they recognized that and didn't like it. And we had a hearing in the aftermath of 9/11 and the anthrax attack, and it was a budget hearing on the Senate side, and Arlen Specter was the chairman of the committee. And we also, in the new administration, well, and in the old one, we had keepers. They'd send a political person from the budget office to sit right next to you at these hearings, whose job was, when they'd ask you a question about the budget, you'd lean over and then they'd say, tell them you don't know, tell them you don't need anything, tell them where to go, whatever. And I'd never lean and never ask these people anything anyways. I've just viewed them as blanks. And so in this particular hearing, I figured, they couldn't hate me any more than they already hated me in the department, so what do you got to lose? And as I often tell people in public health, your job isn't so great anyways. You can afford to be fired. It's not so bad. So Arlen Specter said, in his own inimitable way, well, Jeff, I think, you seem to be underfunded, and you've never asked us for more money, and if you need more money, then you just ought to ask for it. How much do you need? How much do you need for the state health departments? He represents Philadelphia, but his accent's from, I don't know, somewhere else. But he's a public health advocate and has been supportive all along. And I said, without a hesitation, we need $1 billion. And that was our own rough estimate of what it was missing investment, which was about, 500 times more than what's currently going into state health departments. And he said, okay. And we got $1 billion investment.
It was quite a moment.
I should have said $2 billion.
Well, this has been great.
Yeah,
thank you very much, and thanks to everyone for your questions.